Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the last video of 2017. Today I'm recording from my parents' house actually, so this is sort of makeshift studio right here. So I apologize if the video has a little bit of a delay. Should be fine though. Welcome to the last video of 2017, and today I want to show you a talk that I gave at a small seminar in the woods surrounding Frankfurt, Germany, a few months ago at gegenLicht 11. It was a really fun and exciting get-together of a bunch of lighting designers from Germany, Holland, Finland, and Poland. And it was really a really good, exciting time to share knowledge, to get on some consoles and get crazy ass questions. And this was my very first time. It was super exciting. I was actually super nervous, but I'm really glad that I gave this talk because this talk is really interesting. It's a piece of design theory that explains how we perceive our surroundings, and with that also how we perceive our light shows, just visually, human, like intuitively. This is not really about interpretation, but this is more like how does our visual perception work. And it's really fascinating because a lot of the lighting designers, but for example, also one video guy, they were all like, hey, this is really interesting because this theory that you're showing us, we've basically been building our shows for years. We just had no idea that there's actually some theory behind it. So today I want to give you this presentation, but before we do that, I just want to take a look at the numbers really quick because that's where I was at earlier. I don't really pay that close attention to the numbers, but this is super exciting. I'm just gonna refresh this, but I don't think the numbers changed much. Nope, they haven't changed. All right, so this is really exciting because we have almost 10,000 views on the channel and almost 400 subscribers, you guys. This is amazing. I just started this channel a few months ago, and it's been a struggle to upload regularly, and I'll try to do that better in 2018. But in general, I'm really overwhelmed by how much of a positive reaction I've gotten. So thank you guys so much. Starting this channel couldn't have been much more fun. This is really a blast. I'm looking forward to bringing you more fun videos in 2018. So thanks. All right. So today's talk on Gestalt Theory. First of all, let's talk about why this is important. And if you've been to a show recently that wasn't your own, then you might have seen one of these problems with it. Like, many shows today are just too hectic, too busy, too chaotic, too confusing, just a little too much in a way, you know? And I mean, that's just not only me, but this is also, for example, an article that made its rounds in the Lighting Facebook group some time ago, that pretty much called on young lighting designers or operators better, to use some restraint when they're operating their shows, to, dial it down a bit, use the lights in a sensible manner, and not just try to, use every function of the brand new, fancy fixture that they have in their rig. And so, I mean, the question is a little bit how, if you're criticizing young operators, where do we start? Like, how do we learn this stuff? How do we learn how to build better shows? And I mean, sure, experience is one part, but this design theory that I'm about to show you, called Gestalt Theory, could actually be part of the answer here. So what's interesting about this is that it's one of the popular theories informing many of the principles in user interface and user interaction design, user experience design. It's a theory on visual perception, and it was actually created in 1924 by a guy called Max Wertheimer in Berlin. So the city where I also live. And that's actually really exciting. Seems like a sign, doesn't it? And what's really interesting in this theory is that Gestalt principles explain how our brain groups or simplifies what it sees. And that's really important to know, and we'll get to that later. So it's really interesting because Gestalt theory actually seems to be one of 7 different, cornerstones in visual design. So there's a list that I found, which I think is really fascinating, and I think I'm also gonna use 2018 to work through that list more and more. And then, I'll probably even do more videos on this. So let me know in the comments if you want to see more on like design theory. But that's just it. Well, what I'm going to show you in a second is just one part of like a whole field of design theory that we should make more use of. There's a lot of research done on this in terms of user interaction, user design. Companies like Apple have been really, really successful at this, and that's why there's been so much money invested into these fields, into research. And so I think there's a vast amount of theory out there that can really help us build better shows. All right. So what are the benefits of Gestalt theory for our show design? I think it's going to help us create simpler and cleaner, more cleaner visual shows. Also, I think what's really fascinating, because Gestalt theory explains how we visually perceive our surroundings, and they actually describe the intuitive mechanism. So this is really on a subconscious level, because these principles explain how humans perceive things without really thinking about it. Using Gestalt principles, we can actually build shows that humans can better connect to, make sense of. And also, it's really fascinating because Gestalt theory is being used in user interface design to create less confusion for the user, make it clearer for the user what the interface is, trying to get the user to do. And it's also just more human in a way. All right, and so there's a ton of Gestalt principles actually. That's like the little tidbits that make up this whole Gestalt theory. But today I want to just show you a few of these principles in 2 different categories. First, basics of visual perception, and then some principles that apply to programming your shows. And so this whole theory in a nutshell is the whole is other than the sum of its parts. And that's really interesting. So if we take a look at this picture, for example, and by the way, it also was really, really interesting. I knew going into this presentation that I prepared for this seminar called gegenLicht, I knew that there would be a lot of German lighting designers in here. And this is actually a picture of a German band. And so I was expecting, people to like start laughing or chuckling, because they knew who built that show. I kind of forgot about that thought. Then I gave the presentation, and when I arrived at this slide, I'd see this one guy starting to laugh, and I was like, "What?" And it turns out the guy who ran the show was actually in the crowd of like 30 people. So that was a really fun moment. All right, but back to Gestalt theory. The whole is other than the sum of its parts. What we see here is a concert, and what we see here are beams shooting, into the ceiling, and we see like some RGBs, as like the red background. We don't see individual beams here. We don't see the individual cross sections of the truss up here. What we see is a complete picture, a whole thing, a whole something. So this is lesson number 1. Whenever, we see a show, we don't really see the individual parts. If you take a look at your keyboard, you won't see a bunch of rectangles. You just see a keyboard. Simple as that. And so whenever we see a light show, our brain kind of, views it as a whole. That's really important to know. And now the first basic principle of Gestalt theory is that, we always focus our attention on something, and then everything else will become the background. And it's actually really easy to understand why that is. Just imagine yourself walking across a really busy street. In that moment, your senses, your visual, your I don't know the specific words, but your senses, they collect so much information. But in that very moment, when you're crossing a busy street, what you really need to focus your attention on are cars, possibly bikes. So just things that could be dangerous to you. And so that's why our perception is always focusing on something. And that's, in this case, called the figure, while everything else is the ground. And it's really interesting because down here, what you should observe is that this little black rectangle is actually sort of, the center point, while this gray area right here is the background. And now the second Gestalt principle that I want to show you today is focal point. So whenever you have something that visually sort of has a big contrast to everything else, it's going to stick out. And this is so funny because this is a natural thing, right? You're going to see this and you're going to be like, duh, obviously, the red, rectangle is going to stick out underneath like all these, black dots, obviously. But it's really fascinating because this is actually how our perception works. Now, this rect thing right here, it just sticks out. And kind of putting these two together, it means that our perception at all times is trying to find out what it needs to focus on. And so if we just think about that first figure ground principle, where we kind of saw that the little small part in the middle seems to be like the focal point, where the bigger, grayer part kind of seemed to be the background. What that translates to is that if we have a bunch of washers, that's just going to paint the room in a color, then that's probably going to be perceived as the background in a way. While if we have, Sharpies shooting through the whole room in their bright, sparky, crazy edged beams, then, obviously that's going to capture our viewers' attention. So when you build a show, always think about this relationship. Our eyes always try to focus on something. And by giving our eyes a clear sense of what to focus on, we make it a lot easier on our audience's visual perception to kind of understand what's going on intuitively and not overload it. So you should always have like a dominant visual and then a clear background. If you have too many things going on all at once, then that's just going to overload our visual perception system, because it doesn't know anymore what to focus on. It doesn't know anymore what it should, keep an eye on, while it can sort of ignore the rest. So that's why, really, really busy shows feel so straining in a way. And so confusing, because it is confusing, but only on a very subconscious level. And again, we can see this in this example image that I'll bring up more and more throughout this presentation. We have this red background, which really is a good background because red is not such a strong color. And then we have these really sharp spots that are clearly grabbing our attention. So this is a really good example here. We have something that just jumps out at us, and then the rest is clearly the background. All right. So let's take a look at some Gestalt theory principles that can apply to programming that will help you program better shows. So, and this is really interesting. I talked about how, the whole is other than the sum of its parts, and this is part of it. Also part of, our brain sort of being able to focus on one thing and then just, having everything else drift to the background. That's all part of a grouping mechanism. So our brain always simplifies what it sees to kind of be able to make sense of it. And that's what's really, expressed in this sentence right here. Our perception always groups everything it sees into 5 to 8 distinct groups. That's about as much as our our perception system can actually handle at once. So what that means is that instead of 54 individual fixtures, and I even counted this wrong, I think I like missed the spots down here or something. What we see here are only 2 distinct groups for some reason, right? I mean, this is one part, like all these spots are, and then the background is the other part, right? And that's interesting, isn't it? And that's not just the figure ground principle, which we saw earlier. As we're going to see now, there are actually other principles at play here that kind of layer into each other. So the first Gestalt principle that you can really make good use of is similarity. Now, during the seminar, I had people explain to me what they saw on this very screen. And what's interesting is that people will always see columns of objects. So for some reason, these belong together, and then these, and then this right here and that. So these are columns of objects. But why is that? For some reason, our visual perception system groups together things that are similar. And let me just resize my video. Let me just move that up here maybe. So what's really fascinating is that by giving certain groups of fixtures or certain groups of your visual the same gobo or the same color, what you can achieve is that they will be perceived as one thing. And so that's how you end up with only a few groups instead of 200 individual fixtures. Now the second principle is symmetry. And again, this means that instead of 54 individual fixtures, what we see is just a few groups that are distinct to each other. So in general, people tend to perceive things that have symmetry to each other as being a group. So right here, what we can see is that these brackets, for some reason, we automatically assume that they belong together. And that's not just because our culture kind of teaches us that, if you use brackets in a sentence, it's always going to be, close. But also in this case, it's really the symmetry of it. And that's really interesting. So whenever you, for example, use the align function in MA2, what you achieve is symmetry. Or if you just have multiple wings, for example, that's symmetry for you. The next Gestalt principle, which will help you build simpler shows by grouping together multiple fixtures into one, is proximity. And so what's really fascinating here is that, again, we perceive these blocks as 2 groups for some reason. So we definitely feel like these belong together much more than these, for example, these 2 right here. And that's due to the principle of proximity. So that means if you, for example, pan out a bunch of fixtures and you use blocks of 2, all of a sudden you have this something like that. And that just means that all of a sudden these blocks that you're panning out with together, you won't really see or perceive 2 beams then at the same time, but rather what you're going to have is just a thicker visual kind of panning out there together. So you have this stronger, this more emphasized look in a way, instead of just having more, individual beams. All right, and so the next principle is continuation. And this is also really, really interesting. So right here, what you can tell in a way is that these belong together because they sort of form this nice harmonic line. You feel like, if this would be a street map, then this would be a separate street, while this would be the main road. And what's interesting here is that it kind of, have you ever seen an effect being so crazy that you just couldn't make really sense of it, couldn't really tell what kind of a shape was behind all of that? So if you kind of imagine, just a sine wave, if it goes like that, then it's all right. But if it kind of is too crazy, then all of a sudden you can't really, the fixtures don't really belong together. They're just a crazy, unordered mess in a way. So you kind of have to be careful when programming pan tilt effects, because if you kind of do it too crazy, then you lose the illusion that these fixtures are supposed to belong together and are supposed to like be, part of one coherent movement in a way. And also, again, this is not just about like looks or aesthetics. Maybe you kind of want to, have a little bit of crazy randomness, but in general, what you want to do is not overload your viewer's perception. And so you should probably just be aware of all these effects that you can use to kind of layer up, and then like that make looks that, or create looks that just make much more sense to your audience. All right, and then the next part is common fate, and this is also really, really interesting. So up until now, we only had principles that kind of apply to fixtures that are close to each other. So we had the grouping, we had the symmetry. You can sort of imagine all of these principles really applying to fixtures that are sort of in the same vicinity on your stage. But this common fate principle is really that whenever something moves together or moves in the same direction, then this principle is actually whenever they move or change together. So in this case, we have the movement, and so here we kind of perceive these two groups, but it could also just change color at the same time, for example. But this is really cool because what you could have is like a huge arena and then moving heads everywhere. You could have like 4 moving heads or spots like move at the same time, and have them be as far away from each other as can be in your setup. Whenever you move them at the same time or change their look at the same time, your viewer is going to view them as one group, interestingly enough. So your fixtures don't have to be close to each other to be perceived as one. All right, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. In general, what I just showed you are a few Gestalt principles, and these really just make up a small portion of this whole theme, of this whole research. And what I want you to take away from this is that really this was only the beginning, but I feel like that a really good theory can give your intuition vocabulary to kind of express itself. And that's really, really fun when that happens. And a lot of the lighting designers that I showed this presentation to, they were actually amazed at how there is vocabulary, there are words to describe what they have been doing for years now. And so I really hope that this could help you understand why certain things look better to you a little more. And also, I hope that I could show you that there's a lot of research in terms of UI and UX, design theory that can probably help us. Kind of learning from other fields can always, greatly improve our own skills. And so I think we as a whole community should actually get a lot more inspiration from other fields in the creative space. All right, do I have any more slides? Yes, so I'll link these in the description of this video. These are 2 like my main sources for this talk, and some really amazing web design resources. So if you want to learn more about like the 7 different fields that I showed you earlier, where Gestalt Theory is just one of them, then you can take a look at, I think, this first link and then the second link. Like both of these, give you a good quick start, and then a lot of links to kind of dive deeper. So I encourage you to check it out to learn more about what makes really great visuals, because there has been a lot of smart people who already figured this out quite a bit. All right, and with that being said, yes, Q&A will probably a bit complicated at this point, but what you can see or what you can do, as always, is just post a comment down in the comment section. And I'll actually try and, give you a short video reply. There's a great service that I like to use for that from time to time. So I'll really try to answer your questions as best as I can. So if you have any questions at this point about Gestalt Theory or this channel or what my favorite dishes are, whatever it may be, just fire up in the comments below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for a really fun 2017. I had a blast starting up this channel, and already in 2017 gave me so many really great opportunities. At this point, I want to thank Bertelmark for just giving me a call and kind of introducing me to this whole industry, kind of giving me just the intro, really. Also, thank you so much to Lumpy, who organized gegenLicht. It was really a blast, and I still can't express how much fun that was, and how much it means to me to kind of make all these connections to people that are also passionate about this shit. And last but not least, thank you again to all of you guys who subscribed, who wrote a comment below the video, who left a like. Actually, I haven't seen many of those. But I mean, just in general, thank you so much for interacting with my videos, just getting back to me, giving me feedback, getting in touch. I think one of the almost the greatest fears that the creator can have, or at least that's one of my creative fears, is that people just won't respond at all. And I've seen quite the opposite of that in 2017. So thank you. I'll stop talking now and let you get back to your families. Have a wonderful Christmas, you guys, and I'll see you in the next year. Guten Rutsch. Bye-bye.